Welcome to Bond MOTS, where we'll be applying the Manzer or mostly Thurlow scale of quantitative analysis of pop culture narrative through a binary system.
Or MOTS!
This podcast contains spoilers, mature content, and language. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hello, and welcome back to Bond MOTS. Today we are tackling a hefty movie, Detroit. I'm Jonathan Ian Manzer, here with Stephen Hermosi.
Hello.
And Scott Thurlow.
How's it going?
So, we are going to avoid our usual funny log line out of respect for the historical events that took place in this movie. We're going to hop right into our discussion. So I'm going to start off with intro body conclusion. Now, before we get into the synopsis, I would just like to say that this movie really, I wouldn't say sacrifices, but takes place, wants to highlight themes over necessarily structured narrative.
Sure, but
it has it there, but we'll get into this in more detail.
I don't think any of us will say the narrative is unstructured, but it's not like necessarily focusing.
It's not as tight as you would see in other films because they're trying to, in a sense, give a broader message here.
Right. Sure.
So the movie starts out at the beginnings of the riot in Detroit, and you kind of hop between, in a sense, little vignettes and characters until, I would say about halfway through the film, all these events culminate on this hotel which the police raid. And it really spends a lot of time in this hotel showing police brutality and them trying to find what turns out to be a non-existent sniper. And then some people die, a lot of people are brutalized, and eventually it shows the repercussions of that act in both how it personally affects individuals and how it doesn't affect cops in a way.
Right.
So that's the basic premise of this film. And again, as I mentioned, I feel that it at points does sacrifice necessarily narrative. You don't know who the main character is until, or like who you're necessarily following until later in the movie. Sure. Like, you're kind of being swept up in this chaos. Yeah. Which I think is, again, intentional.
I think it's, it was going for that effect, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it absolutely is. And you know, this movie is almost 3 different movies throughout it. And in the beginning, you see this, like, really, you have this really kind of, like you said, Ian, just vignette style almost, just scenes from the riots that are happening, throughout the city, and interspersed with these scenes of, like, people trying to live their normal everyday lives and being affected by things that are happening outside, things like that. And then you have the house scene that you mentioned, or the hotel scene that you mentioned, which is just almost a horror movie.
Kind of.
Like, it's just very, or like a psychological thriller, almost. Like, it's very filled with tension, and it's just it's unrelenting the entire time that this is going on, that this interrogation is happening, over a sniper rifle that didn't exist, and then the end of the movie is just kind of the fallout from the events of what happened there. And, I think it's probably a bigger parable of, like, the fallout of what happened kind of all over or what was happening all over the country, as was touched upon a little bit in the beginning. And
still is today.
And exactly. and to a degree, I mean, there's a reason that this movie is made right now. And
so I'm going to start with the conclusion first here in discussion. I really, because so this is actually a real event, as I find out at the end of the movie. And I didn't know that prior to watching this. So, as we're watching the trial scene, as the audience, I know all the events that went in. And as a person who lives in America, I know what the ending to this trial is going to be.
Yeah, sure.
But to watch, like, it's an open and shut case for me, because I'm aware of what has happened. But to slowly see the case slip apart through better lawyers for the police start manipulating events and manipulating witnesses, playing upon their emotions. So they, one character in particular, like, basically throws out his own testimony by starting. Why am I on trial here? It's the police who are on trial, but they make it about his criminal record.
Yeah. Right.
And
well, they also make it a point that the entire jury is white.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. It is like you look at it, at least in this case, like everything's stacked against stacked in the favor of the cops. And it seems like that is kind of what happens in everyday life. And
sure, both then and now, as we said. And we'll talk more about that, but yeah.
Not that I'm trying to make a bold, political statement from this, but like if you look around and see what happened, see what happens in a lot of trials that are like this.
But this movie is a bold political statement.
Yeah.
And I already see it's going to be actually a very polarizing film. I can see people hating this film.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is a reflection of how people view things. We're going to get into, in a way, how they treated police in this later in themes. But I want to hop back again to the hotel scene, which is the second part of this. What's weird about it is, who you identify with as a character in this is very weird, because I was identifying more necessarily with the police, actually, than I was with the characters. I thought they were terrible people, but I would say maybe one of the more principled National Guardsmen or something like that. Sure. But I felt that they introduced this character about, and he's the main driving narrative force in this. What's his name? Larry, who wants to be a Motown singer. And you're given a lot of his backstory in order for you to really attach yourself to his character. You have to do that too. And this is my biggest complaint in the film, that I felt that they dwelled a little bit too much on the Motown story. But I understand why they felt they needed to. It just, I think, came a little bit too late.
I think I might agree somewhat. I was going to give a 3 to all, a 3 total for this, but I think it does, again, nothing specific per se, or if so, maybe that, but even that's the degree that you just said. But I do feel like maybe it could have been streamlined a little bit more, and even elsewhere, other places as well. Mm-hmm. But I also see the point that you raised, that it sort of has to be there, but that sometimes does not drag down the film, but sort of puts it out to, you have to take in more than maybe is necessary, in some sense. I see what you mean, though. So I largely agree.
Well, we were trying to we were talking about this after the movie. We were trying to figure out
why,
when the script was being written, why did they pick him as
the
focus character?
Yeah.
And I think there were a lot of other characters that were interesting. But it's probably, it could just come down. I don't know why exactly, but it could just come down to he's still around. He might have talked to them.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know they did a lot of research on this, and
sure, and the film does
before
tell you
writing
that,
it and all that type of stuff. But it could have been just he talked to them. It could have been that he was just the most interesting character, outside of this event.
Sure.
But that being said, I think that his story was fine. I actually believed his. I think if I had a complaint about it, it's that they introduced him and his friendship with Fred really quickly, and just right before this whole thing went down, and I wasn't really invested in them as close friends.
So there wasn't enough time to get invested into the relationship.
But this brings it to right back to the beginning now, which is oddly we did this in reverse.
Sure.
But the opening scene is very, very tense, very, very unfocused, but it's rightfully so. The problem with being unfocused, though, is there was no time really to develop any characters for the first 20 minutes.
It sort of throws you right in there. And, it feels somewhat confusing, but as we said, sort of intentionally as an effect, to comment upon the nature of the events. Sure, but again, I agree with that to an extent, so that's why I'm probably going to end up giving Intro Body Conclusion a 2 overall. A very strong 2. I was definitely it kept my interest throughout, for sure. I just remember like thinking here and there, and even upon, as you said, right after the film, we had a quick discussion that like maybe they could have slightly adjusted it. But
I feel though the problem is I don't think they should have changed much, but they did. Again, to my original point, they did sacrifice narrative structure for the chaos and themes. So I'm going to give it a 2 for that. Not necessarily their fault, but
no, I'm with you. I'm pretty much the same way. A strong 2 for sure. I just don't know if I can get full credit. And
I'm going to give it a 3. I think that all 3 aspects of this were pretty strong, and all of their kind of different styles. I think they all said something different about this event, and I really like that about it.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all. Like I was going to maybe give it a 3 going into it, but I think as we talked about, the more I thought about it, it's just not quite enough to get there for a 3. But it is very strong intro body conclusion overall, for sure.
Well, to be fair, audience, Steve-O has always had a strong desire to be a Motown singer. So
he identified with
I never had the voice for it.
No, unfortunately.
Very sad.
So nonetheless,
that's why I drink.
Themes with Scott.
Yeah, so themes, as we earlier mentioned, is the heart of this film, the heart of Detroit, I would say. Like the reason one of the reasons of the major reasons it was made is because it's commenting upon a social and cultural, perhaps even political climate based on, yes, events from the 60s, but are still completely and totally relevant today, right now, which is, of course, the treatment of the police at the hands of minority, just people who aren't police.
I think you mean that reversely to how you said it. Treatment of minorities at the hands of police.
Treatment of those of certain section of our population and communities. Sure, and it's like this was, as you said, an actual event that happened. That they, the film itself tells us that they interviewed people and witnesses and those who were there, and so that means all the characters were based on real people, and they have the evidence and the testimony they have about the events that happened at the hotel.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, yes, it's commenting upon racial tension, police brutality, and the conflict of those coming to a head, and the people working, those just living in the community, what their lives are like, what they face, and the less corrupt, like outright racist establishment police force, if you will. Like they had their lieutenant guy, detective guy. I thought was a solid portrayal of like a person within the police force who is trying to do his job the best he can, and is not outright racist in any way. So, go ahead. I mean, I'm just saying those are like probably the big ones. This film has a lot to pick apart, a lot of layers to it, I'll say. But those are like the obvious ones.
I want to explore that deeper quickly.
Sure.
What I found fascinating about this is that if you want to divide the spectrum between what are traditionally good cops and traditionally bad cops, they divided every single part along that spectrum.
Yeah, it's like subdivided,
so
sure.
You have cops that are willing to, like, in a sense, endanger themselves to rescue a person who needs to go to the hospital. You have cops who, especially the main antagonist of this, who's just likes killing people and wants to.
He's just a bully.
That's the thing, but he's not a bully because he shoots people if he has the opportunity to get away with it. Like,
sure.
They never outright say that, but they demonstrate him on multiple occasions killing people when he can. Then you have the racist cops who are empowered by the psychopath, who view that they like, and it's weird. It's not like I want to kill African Americans because I can. It's more like these people are different than we are. Like that one cop who's talking to the two women, two white women in the hotel, and like, why do you sleep with them? Why don't why aren't you? That's his mentality, and he's empowered by the psychopath. You have the dumb cop who is going along with this because, like,
he can't or won't speak up. Yeah,
like he needs to.
Yeah, sure.
You have the National Guardsman who actually follows everything along until he says, "Oh, this is getting a little too hot. I'm going to bow out now."
Well, he does use his being there as a means to get at least 3 people out of the situation. The 2 women that are there. and the guy who's
one of their friends.
who's like laying in the room. He's like, get out of here.
Sure.
So I think he had kind of decent intentions, but as soon as he saw that it was getting a little hot for him and he might get in trouble, he was out.
Yeah. You have one of the characters, Melvin Dismukus.
Dismukes, I think. Something like that.
Who's a fascinating character of a guy who works in the neighborhood. He works as a security guard, and he believes in the system. And like other black characters call him Uncle Tom, and he's kind of stuck in that position of like being an authority figure within the community, but also a black guy in the predominantly white force. So some of the people that respect him for his merit, others like he's caught stuck in a bad situation. He's caught in an odd
position, of course. Yeah,
and he wants to do the right thing, but he also wants to, in a sense, keep his position. And I think he thinks he can help out the most people by
he wants to use his position to help as many people as possible, but he finds himself, like, of course, at odds with the establishment, with the white part of the policing force.
You have the state police who look at the situation that's developing in this hotel and go, we need to get out of here before we're dragged into this mess. They don't stop it; they just don't take part in it. Like, so you can find on the whole range of spectrum, probably even more than I just outlaid here, which was quite a bit, like of the different types of problems with blue wall of silence and the mentality of police officers.
And of course, even like on top of all that we just said, then when it goes to the third part, like the courtroom stuff, the trial, like it's all unfolded into that, and from a different angle. You know what I mean? So
and they're the union lawyer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But throughout all of this, and regardless of all of the cops' intentions, as wildly varied as they may be, one thing that really strikes you when you're watching this is basically all the cops are white. All the authority figures in this movie are white. And that's kind of how it was in Detroit. And they make mention of this right in the beginning. And I think this is an important theme of kind of trying to say why all this happened. Trying to say what was going on in Detroit at that time. It was a highly segregated area. There were highly segregated areas of Detroit. You had really densely populated sections that were all black, policed by all white people. And when you have two communities when you have a police force that's not part of the community that they're policing, as you can go back and see throughout the history of America, this type of stuff happens.
Well, so I think it was around the Baltimore riots or the Ferguson riots that happened recently. I listened to a lot of news, and I would hear people bring up a lot of the points that were brought up in here. Like, why would people burn down their own communities? Why would oh, look at they're trashing their own shops and all that.
Sure.
Yeah. And here they're saying, like, you're bringing up the point is, anyway, they're living in a prison.
Right.
And one character, I think, was saying, like, look, like, all this stuff is owned by white people. Like, we don't own any of that. The cops, like, can take it from whenever they want. They're not.
It's not ours anyways.
Yeah, they're destroying their segregated area here. I think it addresses a lot of powerful topics and really addresses a lot of issues I've heard brought up. Among people criticizing.
It's almost like the strawman arguments that it addresses.
Yeah, there's that one point where I think it was Carl is talking before he gets shot.
Yes, it was him.
And he says, like, they'll say to you, you get stopped by a cop, they'll say, what are you doing out here on my streets? Like, they need to take those streets from you and own them. And that's kind of goes to what you're saying. Like, that's,
All right, that's a good point.
That's a important statement about what happens, in situations like that. Like,
absolutely,
those by all means should be the streets of the people that live there. This should be, what are you doing out here on my streets? What are you doing out here in my town? And it's like, this is not your town. You don't live here. The community that lives here should be the one policing it. But Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's. I think I've said most of what I wanted to say for themes. I don't know about you guys. If you have anything.
No,
else
I mean,
to say.
like I just think we should reiterate that is an important thing that's addressing that. Yes, it's based on an event from the '60s, but it is totally relevant today, and it's something that like needs to be in the cultural conversation because it's still a big problem.
Yeah,
and I think it does a very good job of portraying it as you just laid out.
Mm-hmm.
But my big problem with this, and maybe this is going to recommendation too soon, but will this fall on deaf ears?
Or is it preaching to the choir in a sense?
Yeah, like I'm willing to hear this message. I'm interested in hearing this message. If a person doesn't want to hear this message,
They're not going to hear it anyway. Sure, I mean, that's always going to be true, but...
So, like, I'm hoping that this can reach people. But I think, but regardless, because I think the themes are very, very important.
Yes, I think they're important and strongly, when well portrayed, so I'm going to give it a pretty strong one.
I completely agree. I'm going to give this a strong one as well.
Absolutely. All right, Mr. Ramosi, on to you, antagonist.
Us.
All right, well, I think that the first obvious antagonist is the cop in the hotel who is basically the ringleader of the douchebag crew, the Three Stooges. Kraus, I believe is his name.
Yeah, of course.
And he's just the guy that portrays him does a great job of being like a thinly veiled psychopath. But he, I think that character is really strongly portrayed in this.
I agree with that,
and it makes definitely antagonizes the rest of
almost everyone else,
the rest of the cast. Yeah,
even his fellow cops at times.
Yeah, indeed. So I think he does a great job, and obviously the overall idea, racism in general is very much an antagonist.
That's what I was going to say, obviously, but surely it's there.
Yeah, but that's kind of my take on the antagonist. I don't know what else you guys would say.
I definitely agree. Like we often trade off on this question. You and I specifically, Steve-O, that I will say the broad abstract thing of racial unease and unrest in humanity in America and our society, and yes, as portrayed by Kraus, Officer Kraus, and his two little cronies as well. But I agree that I think the actor did. Sorry, I don't have his name on hand. Did a pretty good job of playing that role.
Absolutely,
and felt menacing throughout for sure. Even before the whole they set him up, but yeah, he just enjoys and he'll make any excuse that he can, or even when he's questioned by his superiors at the force. He's justifying his actions in his own mind and attempting to justify them so that he stays on force and is able to abuse his power, pretty much, more or less. So yeah, I mean, I think it was a well done antagonist, and if you take the layer above that, i.e. the racism and so forth, the unease between communities and cultures, then I think it was all well handled by the film as well.
I'm going to take a more optimistic antagonist here.
Okay.
Because yes, you have Kraus, who's a bad person. And I might argue that perhaps Carl, who shoots off the starter pistol, is in general a bad person. I don't necessarily think he's like a terrible, he's not a monster like Carl is.
No, of course not.
But he's an asshole too.
No, he's just kind of an idiot, but you can see why. The thing is, I don't want to go too much into it, but they're hanging out in a hotel room, they're getting high, they're having some beers or whatever, and he has a little the gun you for horse races,
starter pistol,
and and he makes that speech about cops come get off our street, boy, all the stuff that they hear constantly all the time. He's I think he says one of the lines that reminded me. He says, "Being black is like having a gun pointed in your face all the time."
Yeah.
And that, I think, so yeah, even though he sort of perhaps went a little overboard with his antics trying to portray that, yeah, he's kind of your idiot friend. Hey, put your stupid little toy gun. He's no, man, this is what's happening in the streets.
Can often be an antagonist.
Exactly.
Without him being an idiot, a lot of people would
sure, perhaps, things would have gone differently.
Who did he antagonize, though?
The cops.
Yeah.
Accidentally,
but they didn't even know it was him.
See, here's the thing. I think it's a lot of...
It's a shitty antagonist.
Sure, but...
I think there's a lot of decent people in this movie...
Pushed to a breaking point.
That don't know how to handle the situation they're in.
Yes, absolutely.
Because you have a lot of, the National Guard and police officers who... Vietnam's still fresh in their mind. They're treating the situation like it's Vietnam. That there's snipers.
I think someone
everywhere.
even says this is worse than Nam, or can't believe he's this is like Nam and we're in America.
Because yes, it allows people like Kraus to exist, but I think the majority of the troops that are portrayed there were portrayed as at least just soldiers or at least decent people.
They're just trying to do what they are called in to do, but they've never seen anything like this, at least in their own backyard, if you will.
It's not. It's the fact that like all of this issues, racism, all of that, coming to a boiling point, and a lot of people not knowing how to handle that situation.
Sure, absolutely agree.
Yeah.
So all of that is very effective antagonists, I would say.
But so here's a question though: why?
Sorry.
So I don't know. I guess you're not really talking about the cronies of Krauss either. You're just talking about people that aren't really portrayed. Maybe the one National Guard guy who sticks around.
Yeah, him and the state cops as well.
The coffee cops, all that.
Yeah.
Like most people here were portrayed as decent folk.
The coffee cops were just pretty racist, though. They kept asking him why, when his people were going to stop rioting and shit like that. He was like, "How the hell should I know?" I mean,
I guess
whatever. I don't think they were like fucking
my argument,
antagonists. But I don't think Carl is an antagonist either. By that regard, I think he's just a jerk off who's screwing around, he's drunk and screwing around, and he made a bad mistake.
I'm just saying that I think cooler heads could have prevailed, but they didn't. And a lot of destruction happened.
Yeah,
and I wish they had. I wish that this movie didn't have to be made.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
Yeah, it'd be nice if we didn't have to come to this point. But I think the reason, we perhaps have, or at least the film does a good job of taking all those things and making them both tangible and intangible antagonistic forces. So I will give it a 1.
Give it a 1.
Yes.
All right.
So I'm on to protagonist. Now I think that. Krauss was a great face for the antagonist. And I think that this movie just has a much more challenging, because it's not quite an ensemble piece.
It is to a degree.
It tries it, but I would say if you have to argue, there are 2 protagonists. One is Motown Larry, who I think is the straight up protagonist in a lot of senses. Right. It could be argued as a singular one. But I also think that
Melvin
is also a protagonist. He gets less screen time, but I think that he's there for all the important events, and you see a lot of it from his eyes. He's also the representation of a different, I guess, the elder generation of African Americans.
Sort of like a different section of the community, even. Yeah. Sure.
So I think both of those. I think they, especially Melvin, who is played by the guy from Star Wars,
John Boyega.
Did a phenomenal job.
He was great for sure. I think everyone was, but I do agree. Brief comments about protagonists is that yes, I do think you can sort of cut them up as the main 2, and then Fred and all the other friends and the people who are in the hotel are probably going to be secondary, which I'll speak about in a second. But I do think they were strongly portrayed, Motown Larry, if you will, and security officer Melvin. But no, I mean they represented and were if not likable, but I think they were just well-rounded characters that you could see where they fit in their community and how they're reacting to the events that were happening around them.
About well-rounded, security officer Melvin, I understood his motivations completely and felt his betrayal when the system failed him.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could see it on his face, and it was it was very believable when he realizes that.
You could see it on the ground after he puked his guts up.
Things are not, as he thought they would be.
But when he gets arrested that first time.
Sure, yeah, exactly.
I completely agree with that. That John Boyega does a terrific job in this, and just the character,
Mm-hmm.
We keep saying the character. This is a real guy. He's still alive. They did interviews with him.
The portrayal of these people in this film.
But yeah, the portrayal was terrific, and I thought they did a good job with Larry too.
Yeah.
Damn fine.
He actually had a character arc where Melvin did as well. His feeling the betrayal of the system.
I think they both had arcs that were solid.
But Larry's life completely was upended by this.
Sure.
And he kind of lost what he was living for, in the beginning of the movie. So I'm going to give protagonist a pretty strong 1 in this.
Yeah, damn solid.
Both counts.
Damn solid, a strong 1 for me as well.
Okay, Scott, on to you with supporting.
So with secondary, it's not tricky, but because of what we just said, there's a lot of other characters like Fred, Larry's friend, sort of roadie, like he hangs around with their Motown band, and I guess like Julie and the two girls,
Karen is the
that
other
were
one.
prostitutes that are hanging out, like, and like all the other people. Like,
I don't think they were actually
like,
prostitutes.
okay, let's settle this right now. They said they were.
Yeah, they were just like
Or just,
talking
like-
about. I think they were just joking around about doing it because they were out of money.
Oh,
So they talk
okay.
about being broke. Right
I thought they
before
actually
that.
were. That's why they're at the hotel.
No.
It doesn't actually matter though. I
Because she
suppose.
was talking about like asking her mom for more. She's like, I'm not asking my mom for more money.
All
Maybe
right.
we just like be prostitutes. I think that's kind of what.
All right.
what
Well, either
that
way,
was.
they were there, and I think they were likable. They're sort of like mini skirt wearing '60s party girls in a sense. Maybe that's why they were broke. But and like I said, like his other bandmates and one of the I think Aubrey's father, like Aubrey himself, is another friend.
Mhm.
Like all the guys who are hanging out in the hotel room when they go back to, they bring Larry and Fred to meet him, and even like the National Guard guy and a couple of other his other fellow guardsmen that Melvin talks to briefly. Like,
Yeah.
this movie has to like support a lot of people because it's about like riots breaking out in a major city, and like a lot of people have to be there to be involved in it.
It's actually surprisingly narrowed down on its scope
terms of that,
based
I
on
suppose.
like the
Sure.
fact that it's about a riot in an entire
Like,
freaking
even
city.
in
you
the
know?
beginning, like I'm sorry again, I don't remember the actor's name, but he plays Lucius Fox in Gotham. He was one of the guys who was busting up the speakeasy,
Yeah.
the illegal after hours bar, and I thought like that would be a big part of the film. It wasn't. It was like basically a cold open intro, and he was never in the film again.
Yep.
And Anthony Mackie.
I think that's what sparked off the riot.
Yeah, I mean, it's supposed to be the event that like started like that ignited the sparked the flames. You're right, but Anthony Mackie played a returning U.S. Army officer named Green. That he's not even his first name. He did a good job. He just, I mean, like, so I think there's a lot of them, and they might not be as well rounded because if the movie had to spend time focusing on all these characters, it'd be like a 4-hour fucking movie.
Yep.
So what they were within it and the time they had and the people, the cast, the actors, I think they did a solid job overall. And even like the detective guys, like, again, all the police guys, the guy who, after Officer Krause realizes he's going to probably be suspended or fired, he tries to he walks out of the station and is going to drive away, and his superior officer, the lieutenant, is like, "Get back here, you racist fuck! Like, where the hell do you think you're going?"
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like, I like that. I thought it's solid, probably 1 overall, just for all of them, even though they weren't like the most well-rounded secondary, because they couldn't really like afford to do that.
Right.
First of all, I forgot an antagonist. White women. They're always an antagonist.
Okay.
But but that one girl's scream was magical. Like, it literally stopped all the villains in their tracks.
One of them was like, even like, Jesus Christ! Like, I remember that.
Yeah.
You're right. Sure.
But no, I thought almost every, like, aside from perhaps Carl's crew, like the couple people you meet in there, I knew who Green was. I knew I could distinguish between the two young girls. I knew who most people were and understood them to be more than one dimension.
Sure,
Mhm.
for the most part.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I said,
agree.
It all adds up to a solid one, I think.
Yeah, you kind of got an idea of all these people based on
And I guess,
their short performances and what they were, given.
exactly. And John Krasinski's small cameo as the
as the
union
lawyer.
cop lawyer. Like, yeah. I mean, it was all fine. So I can't, like, I know we normally pick out one specific one, but I can't really do that in this film. I just think it all comes together. It's all believable mix of, peoples and from various cultures and communities, clashing together or trying to survive together. So,
It's
I
one
agree.
all around.
yes, sir.
Okay, Ormusi, on to dialogue with you.
All right. Now, I'm not going to contend that this is like an eminently quotable movie. However, what I will say is that I think all the dialogue was really impactful and well delivered.
Yes.
And I think it's just a well written movie in terms of dialogue.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really intense scenes that are carried by just conversations that people are having. Really, that really makes up the bulk of, especially like a lot of the tension from the hotel scene comes from the dialogue that's happening there.
For sure.
So, in terms of dialogue, I think it's going to be a pretty strong one. I can't think of any faults that I found with it.
No, I pretty much agree. It was rock solid, and because of the nature of the situations and the such tenseness, if you will, throughout most of it. I believed every goddamn word everyone was saying. You know what I mean? Like nothing seemed out of place, as you said, and everyone did a good job delivering. Were they like eminently quotable lines? No, but they don't need to be, and nor should they be. They just needed to be things that I mostly believe people would be saying in these situations. Good.
I will point out a cringe-worthy scene, though.
Okay.
And it's not to the detriment of the film, because it's meant to be awkward. But Motown Larry and Fred the Friend go to pick up the two girls.
Yeah.
Oh, you just don't like awkward things.
Yeah, it wasn't really
awkward.
Bad.
I don't think it was bad dialogue.
No, it's not, I'm not saying it's not to the detriment of the film. It's just, it was awkward and cringy.
Yeah.
Like them trying to pick up the two. And they get into this like really weird situation between a drugged out Carl's crew. And
I mean, it's almost like college. Let's go pick up these chicks, and they're like, "Hey, let's go hang out with my friends." You're like, "All right, cool," and you're like, "Ah, oh, great, what a bunch of assholes."
It was really weird. It was not weird as in the way of like being out of place. It made me feel like I'm reliving my like early 20s.
It gave you PTSD apparently, but it was still good dialogue. I think overall.
No, it's fair.
Yeah. So that's ones all around on that.
Yep.
So on to style. A lot of this movie was shot in kind of the documentary war style.
Kind of.
Shaky cam going on quite a bit.
Not all of it, but a number of scenes were like that, yeah.
They did the splicing of real historical footage with modern day film. I actually think they did a couple of times. They made some footage to look like historical footage and had characters in it to make it feel like it was in that.
Yeah, but I thought it was pretty seamless in that sense. Go on.
And I think that the whole setup of the hotel scene and the hostage situation there, or I guess it's not the police raid on it, was very tense. And a lot of things were happening in a lot of different rooms. And I had a good sense of feel where everyone was in relation to everyone else.
That's something that's easy to overlook too, because
and it's not easy to do. But
you've seen a lot of movies where that's not the case, and you're like, where the hell did that person go? Like, why are they coming back from there? And like this movie, you never felt that way. You always knew where everyone was at all times, and you had a really good sense of like, I don't know. I was going to say you had a good sense of time, but it felt like it must have felt to everybody lined up against that wall to an extent.
Forever, of course.
It just felt like it took so long. And that, I'm not even sure how long that section of the movie was, but it just felt like it was never ending. And it was like the tension was cranked up to 11 the entire time that was going on.
Exactly. I think it was definitely on purpose, because I noticed that myself. And I think they were going for that effect. And I was going to say, I'm definitely going to give the style a strong one. And on top of, again, everything you said with using the actual historic footage and also historic like radio quotes and like radio updates that they would intersplice. They also, it seemed to like, the film had a lot of like, I want to say, not jarring, I guess, but jagged like hard cuts where like you're in a scene and then boom, and like, but I think again, very well and like smartly, intentionally done, because it felt like being in a confusing riot situation.
Exactly. And there was, this is just one little thing I noticed. There were a lot of shots with like lens obstruction.
Yeah. I noticed that too.
Which I thought was like a really interesting way to show it. You know, there's, like you said, it's a confusing situation, and this kind of puts like a little blur on the situation.
Well, I think one of the things they wanted to do was give you a very voyeuristic feel for a lot of this.
Exactly. I felt like I was in that room with that lineup throughout that whole tense scene for sure.
But the voyeuristic things makes you feel like you're watching something you shouldn't be watching. And and this goes to the kind of the hidden secrets.
And it adds sort of a sense of unease to it, I would say. Yeah.
And they had Mitt Romney's father in this as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So something that shouldn't be seen.
Now, I know there's something else that you usually mention. So they did have a couple of songs, like for example, when they like the soundtrack
there was singing.
There was the Motown stuff. But for the most part, I think it was just sort of like there was no ambient music. I don't remember a lot of it anyways, if there was any.
Right. I actually didn't notice. It's something that I usually look for. And
that's what I'm saying.
Just didn't notice.
I think it's because of
perhaps it wasn't really there. I don't think there was much of a score.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
And there was only a few songs. So that, I mean, I guess the ambient music was the sounds of the rioting going on in the
so that's kind of what I mean. Like you usually would notice like there's a lot of silence in the film, but I think because the movie does a good job of being so tense throughout most of it that you like you said, you feel like you're like peeking around something that you're not supposed to see, or like something that you didn't want to see. So therefore, it's like holding your breath, and you don't notice like music. So I think that was well done on that front as well. I just wanted to bring that up that we normally do, but I'm giving style 1 overall.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Scott, on to your recommendation.
Alrighty, yes, I do recommend Detroit. We had a cast discussion that looking up the stuff or surrounding it, the buzz surrounding it, it almost certainly is going to be an Oscar film, and I think rightly, deservedly so at this point. I was excited to see it going into it, and the more and more I heard about it, and now having actually seen it, yeah, it's a goddamn solid movie that addresses, like we said, important things, and is well done, has a great cast, just solid overall, and something that needs to be, I think, shown in the spotlight, and it deserves to be seen. So, I say see it.
I agree with you, Scott, but I also think that, as you mentioned earlier, Ian, it's going to be highly divisive.
Sure, it's polarizing, but I think it's a sign of a good film.
There are going to be people that say that no one should see this film, or there are going to be people that refuse to watch it because of things they hear about it.
Sure, of course. Right.
And, if it can start a dialogue, great. I'm not sure if there's much going to be happening in the way of dialogue for a lot of people that are that far to either side that they don't want to see this, but I recommend that everybody watch it and talk about it.
So right before we did this review, I happened to check. I saw an article by the New Yorker who called this an immoral film in the way it portrayed black people in America, and saying that it's the police force that gives them identities to this. What a load of horse hockey!
Yes.
I think this movie is designed to make you feel uncomfortable it's literally a litmus test over how racist you actually are. Because if you come across with white privilege a lot, but don't think, I think you could find this very offensive. If you're actually it's a really interesting movie, and I like to talk to other people about this. I like to
see their reactions.
Go watch this movie. Let's sit down and chat about what we thought of this. And I love movies that do that, so I highly recommend it. And you know what? No one ever does. But if you you watch this film and want to leave a comment in our YouTube,
we'll talk about Detroit with you
about whether you found this to be a good representation of either African Americans or police. What you hated about it. I would love to get that kind of argument started. Yeah. And I think this movie wants to get that argument started.
Or at least, if not an argument, perhaps we'll use the word discourse, but certainly some kind of conversation, perhaps.
This is too bold.
I know you're saying it's a polarizing film. It's not that I disagree.
Let's sit down and this is a statement.
All right, fair enough.
And that's why I think it's heavily polarizing.
All right.
Which, I fully recommend.
Yes. So, well, I do too, of course.
Indeed.
As I said, but yeah.
So, the final scores are Scott and I gave it a 9, and Steven gave it a 10, giving it 9.3 overall.
Yeah, and I think that's about right. It's a very, very strong movie. Probably one of the best ones I've seen this year, and as I said, it just happens to almost certainly be a lock for an Oscar film, and I can certainly see why. But even if it weren't, I still think, like I said, an important film, or a good film that addresses an important issue in our modern society, and is well crafted. Yep. So, check out Detroit.
Well, I'm Jonathan E. Manzer, here with Stephen Ramosi.
Have a good night.
And Scott Thurlow.
See you next time.
Editing and engineering by Christopher Morgan. Music by Christopher Morgan. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates.